Rapid City, South Dakota was my first student pulpit when I was in rabbinical school. And I actually have to tell you, I loved this pulpit. It was a fun congregation, and Rapid City happens to be surrounded by some really beautiful areas. And the areas were made even better because of the host who always put me up when I was in town. Stan was a South Dakota state senator and would often be in Pierre, the capital, doing all the things for which he was responsible. Now, Stan had many houses, and when I would stay at one of his houses, I would often be all alone. I was either at his house in Rapid City, which I think overlooked some really beautiful parts of the city, or his house just about 20 miles away, which overlooked Mount Rushmore. But in any event, when I went to the pulpit, it was rare that I would see my host. On my last visit, I flew into South Dakota at about 11 in the morning and got to the house around 1. It was still several hours until dinner and services, so I decided, as I sometimes do, to go for a run. And as I always did, even though I was unobserved, I took off my dress shoes at the door and then went on my run. I went into the room where I stayed, put on my clothes, and then just went on out. I got back, worked on my sermon and service for the night, showered, and then changed for services. I was on my way out when I couldn't find my dress shoes. Now, I thought I'd put them right by the front door, but they were nowhere to be seen. I checked all over the house, any place I'd been, but still, no shoes. Now, I couldn't wear a suit and running shoes. It wasn't Yom Kippur after all. So, before going to synagogue, I drove to the local Kmart and picked up just, the cheapest pair of black shoes I could find. The rest of the night went well. Dinner and services were great, and it was time for the oneg. And during the oneg, I was doing my usual schmoozing when I noticed Stan. He was not at dinner, so he must have snuck in sometime during services. I greeted him, and he explained he came back earlier that day and was just going around running errands. It was at this time I looked down and saw he was wearing my shoes. Now, there are some things that rabbinical school prepares us for, and there are some things which it does not. And I was not ready for this scenario. So I never said anything. And as far as I know, he still has those shoes. And sometimes I think about them, where they are now, what become of them, all because I didn't act. On Rosh Hashanah, we read the story of Abraham almost sacrificing his son Isaac. However, tonight, I would like to discuss the relationship not that he had with Isaac, but the one that he had with his parents. Abraham's father is named Terach. We do not know the name of Abraham's mother from just the Genesis narrative, which continues, unfortunately, in absence of a female perspective from which we could have all benefited. What we do know, though, is Terach is a polytheist and worships many gods. Terach, in Hebrew, means silly old fool, and although Terach was not against the move to Canaan, it was obvious that Abraham and Sarah were who God chose as the first monotheists. In the Midrash, a collection of rabbinic laws and stories, there's another tale about Terach. Well, more accurately about Abraham, just with Terach's shop. You may be familiar with this account. When Abraham, then Avram, was working in his father's store, Avram destroyed all the idols sculpted by his father. He did this because idolatry was a sin, and there was only one God, not many. Now, the rabbis initially praise Abraham for this act. However, there is an issue which is raised. As you can see, the 5th of the 10 commandments is to honor our father and our mother. Was Abraham doing this when he destroyed his father's idols? There are a few answers to this question. Some say Abraham wouldn't know the 5th commandment because it wouldn't be written until hundreds of years after his death. And others say some commandments have more importance and can outweigh other laws. Whatever the answer with which you agree, it is important to note that even in the nuance, Abraham acted. In destroying the idols, he was not idle. This idea of action against polytheism is represented in our most famous prayer, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Now, bringing in the story of Abraham we just heard, it would make sense that one would be a reference to God being the only God, as we are, of course, monotheists. However, it is also possible that the one is actually the mathematical understanding of one. Not that God is singular, but that God is whole. This was the understanding taken by Hermann Cohen, an early 20th century Jewish philosopher. God was whole, an ethical ideal. As humans, it is impossible to reach that 100% that God is. However, that doesn't mean we can't get close. Each action we take can bring us towards that wholeness. If our actions have a positive impact, our action has a number, according to Cohen, which is between the tiniest bit above 0 to the tiniest bit below 1. If our actions have a negative impact, then our score is just below 0 to just about -1. Something we don't always discuss, though, is not about our negative actions, but about our inactions, when we are not positive or negative, but in fact 0. The world was not changed at all by us, and in a world which is constantly moving, inaction can sometimes be unethical. And as monotheists in this frame, good action toward a more equitable and understanding future is actually a religious act. Now, there are, of course, reasons that we may not act. I don't know what to do. This particular issue, has nothing to do with me, and I don't understand anything about it. And, of course, I can understand points from both sides. Now, these are things all of which I have said, and I believe a lot of us have said when faced with an issue. These are all excuses for us to be inactive, to be idle, to be 0. These explanations of foregoing immediate action are not bad. In fact, Hermann Cohen was a big advocate in understanding as many perspectives as possible before making a decision. However, these cannot be excuses for inaction, only explanations for delayed action. There are times when I have used these phrases as an excuse to do nothing. Now think about our original story. Abraham perhaps knew he needed to honor his father, but also knew it was wrong to worship idols. If he had not acted, I think there would have been another idol in the story, the idolatry of idleness, which I will call tonight idolatry. We are sometimes all guilty of this idolatry, not knowing what to do, so we do nothing. But sometimes we really don't know what is the best path forward. Now, going back to my story, I was unable to have an uncomfortable conversation that I had not had before, which led to my inaction. And I think in some ways, to not commit this sin, we must do research. This is perhaps more important now than ever. We're living in an age where truth is sometimes surpassed by sensation. We've all seen articles which will pique our interest at the least and boil our blood at the most. Now, there are sometimes this is necessary, as there are many terrible things which happen in this world, things which we are even partly responsible and even may be able to help fix. However, if we read something which prompts us immediately to that action, or something which puts us in a place where we will be guilty of that idolatry, research, I believe, should be our first action. What are my values, and how does this issue run contrary to them? Going and finding reputable sources which discuss this subject. A few months ago, along with our Social Action Committee, our congregation acted to help reunite children with their parents. When this issue was first brought forward, I saw a couple of things being shared which were later found to be either untrue or not related to the issue that people were sharing. And I actually saw this coming from both sides of the political aisle. So much so that it helped many of us to be idle, as we didn't know what to do. In this way, even sometimes immediate action can lead to inaction, as it can cloud the truth. But the truth and that way forward, I believe, is represented in a wonderful ideal brought to us from the book of Isaiah. We read this part during the high holiday period where it said, "Kings shall tend your children, queens will be their nurses, and they will bow their face to the ground to kiss the dust from your feet." Now, I think there are many ways to interpret this verse, but the way I think that this vision should be interpreted is where the rich tend to the destitute actually describes a system where everyone in a society, no matter their position, will work together to bring up all in their midst. The vision is not that one day the people on the bottom will one day be rulers, but that even rulers will care and provide support for everyone in their rule. So action's purpose, and in this case I think monotheism's purpose, is to act to make a more equitable world. Now we are fortunate to be in a country where any citizen, no matter their position, can influence the direction we go. Our elected officials who rule are working for all of us in our nation. We can only bring this vision of an equitable future in Isaiah to light, though, by getting involved and by voting. It is our goal to have our congregation, Chaim, be a 100% voting congregation. And I think that we can accomplish this in a few different ways. First, a lot of you already vote, and if that's the case, you don't have to listen to the rest of the sermon. However, we'll also be sending out emails with links of how we can register to vote online, how we can register by mail, or even send in our ballots. And if you don't want to do that, we'll also have many congregants here who are registrants who can register you right here at Congregation Eitz Chaim. Of course, registration, though, is only half the battle. Voting in this upcoming election is the next part. And to help accomplish this aspect of the process, we will be creating congregational groups. You may get an email coming up to the election or in the next couple of months just to remind you and give you information on how to register to vote, but also when getting close to the election to talk about your plan, how to actually get to the vote and do so. You will also get a prize if you tweet at Eitz Chaim on Twitter with your I voted sticker. Voting in this way is a great way to be active and not idle, though there still needs to be research in for whom you're voting and why. A vote with no understanding of the implications of the person elected is perhaps worse than idolatry, as it is active participation through willful ignorance in potential destruction. Now this, of course, is not the end of our action. There's still so much to be done to help make our society better and live that ideal we discussed. However, the first act of monotheism, in a lot of ways what Judaism is, was one which was not done with all aspects known of an issue. This teaches us we do not have an excuse to be inactive. In our original story, Abraham shattered idolatry and his own idolatry by doing something. I lost a pair of shoes by not doing anything. Today, voting gives us a chance to raise our voices and live our values, to bring those in power face to face of the concerns of all in this country. With our actions, we can be Jews by understanding our values. We can be monotheists by looking to all perspectives and finding that united path forward, and we can make God whole by acting on these values and elevating the world to that equitable ideal. Shana Tova.